Good morning. This is Larry O'Brien of ARC Advisory Group, and welcome to the ARC Cybersecurity Podcast. Our topic today is the convergence of cybersecurity and safety. And I have with me here today Eric Cosman of ARC. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning.
And I have Hal Thomas, and I have Isiah Jones with us today. And Hal is an independent consultant, and Isiah Jones is with Jacobs Engineering.
Yep, that's what I'm with these days.
So why don't we, since this is our first official cybersecurity podcast, I'm part of the Smart Cities and Cybersecurity team at ARC, so this is my first cybersecurity podcast. But Eric, why don't we go down the line with Eric, Hal, and Isiah, and just say a few words about yourself before we start in on this very important topic.
Yeah, sure. I can start. This is Eric Cosman. I'm a contributing consultant to ARC, primarily focused in the area of industrial cybersecurity, although I do some work in other areas. In addition to that, I'm the co-chair of the ISA 99 committee, which was responsible for the 62443 standards in this space. And I have the honor this year, in the 75th anniversary year of the International Society of Automation, of serving as society president.
Thanks, Eric. And Hal?
Hi, Hal Thomas. I've been participating on the S84 Safety Instrumented System suite of standards for a few decades now. That's the safety side of things. And I also chair TR 84.00.09, which is a technical report under that committee, which is devoted to cybersecurity for the controls networks involving process safety, controls, alarms, and interlocks.
Thanks, Hal. And Isiah?
Yeah, I'm a 15-year cyber professional. Came originally out of the DoD, mostly Navy and Marine Corps. Did some time in FERC, mostly national security perspective is kind of what I bring to the table. I'm also a contributor for both the 62443 and the 84 on the security side for safety systems. So I kind of bring in that, holistic, all hazards, all threats, offensive, defensive perspective, not just looking at networks, but have a heavy background in systems design, systems integration, systems assessments, et cetera, because a lot of people talk about networks, but, I've touched a little bit of everything.
Thanks, Isiah. Yeah, I think that's what's great about the people that we have on today is that they are all experts in cybersecurity and safety, and also process safety. But our discussion isn't limited to process safety today, and I think the reason we're having this discussion today is probably because of this TRITON TRISIS malware incident that happened back in 2017. We're really a sort of an advanced persistent threat group gained access to a process safety system at a Middle Eastern petrochemical processing facility. And we're trying to actually reconfigure the safety system when the safety system did in fact trip. So that's good news that the safety system did its job, but I think it also sort of woke everybody up to the fact that, hey, process safety systems are not immune from cyber attacks. And in a way, it expanded the discussion to, fill this role of, how do cybersecurity and safety interact? How do we design systems to be secure and safe? Obviously from the process industries, it's a big concern because we're dealing with refineries and petrochemical complexes that have the potential, for explosions and incidents and impact on human life. But I think we're also going to talk about some other industry segments today too that might be at risk. I'm just interested in your thoughts about TRISIS and TRITON and, how people are reacting to this sort of new world that we're in where, these types of systems are no longer immune. And what are we going to do? Where do we go from here? How did we get here and where do we go from here? Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I can weigh in. From my perspective, especially with my background, those systems were never immune because of the environments that I come from and the rooms that I've been in. Whether you're using kinetic effects or electronic effects, none of those systems were ever immune. The problem was they weren't always directly targeted. And when they were, it was kept very quiet and it wasn't just blatant beeline public, let's go out there and mess with stuff. And we don't care if everyone knows we did it. What you see today is now everyone's beelining for stuff because they have agendas and they don't care if they did it. So I think from my perspective, that's the major shift, is that actors that have always been out there, whether it's, nation states, insider threats, or just bad system design in general, we've always had those issues, but we never looked at them from the perspective of, hey, now someone's directly, intentionally going after these systems, completely bypassing the regular control system and just beeline straight headed for the safety system. I think that's what's different today.
If you go back a decade ago, companies, safety engineers would basically say that sabotage is not in our scope. That's somebody else's job. But as Isiah said, now that control systems are being attacked, the realization that process safety or just safety incidents in general can occur, companies are beginning to rethink that. And so going forward, this is going to be a topic that gets more and more integrated into the safety engineer's role.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Hal, is that we end up spending a lot of time in what I see as largely pointless debates and discussions about whose job is this. And the fact of the matter is that the attackers, or even if it's a non-focused attack or a sort of, not necessarily a deliberate attack, but the consequences, if you will, don't respect organizational boundaries. And so therefore we can't either. It's not as simple as saying, well, it's your responsibility or it's my responsibility. It's our responsibility. If the domains collide or connect, and they do for a variety of reasons, technological and otherwise, then it's going to take a team approach. So I would like to see us as a community move past these debates about, who's responsible. And let's get on with it.
Yeah, me too. And I
Amen.
think, the distinguishing thing about these kinds of attacks too is that they are quite definitely intended to do some kind of damage in the physical world, right? This isn't just a ransomware attack or, harvesting people's personal information. I mean, the only reason to go into a safety system to reconfigure it is so that system will not respond in the way it was designed to respond to shut a plant down safely, in the event of an abnormal situation. So to me, that's the critical thing. That it seems clear
Even
that they
more
want to take
critical
action.
than that,
Yeah.
even more critical than that is once you've rendered the safety system useless, the same hackers can actually cause the demands that system would be expected to protect against.
Precisely.
And actually create situations that in the past may have been considered very low likelihood events, maybe even expressed as non-credible events that today are credible.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to allude to earlier. For people like me in my environment, where I started out my career in the beginning, none of that stuff was impossible for us because we were in the business of warfare, not profit. So thinking of those kind of things and sitting in rooms around special forces guys and engineers and hackers and intel people and like, hey, how are we going to do X? Or, hey, how do we stop these people from doing that to us? That was just the culture I came from. So for me, to Hal and Eric's point, I think the biggest thing is that the public now needs to be aware of that, and Hal hit it on his head. If they go after the safety system, now you have to think, oh, this means they can also cause these consequences because the safety system might not be their only target. That just means they're more educated now to understand what the safety system is for. So whatever their agenda is, to Eric's point, we should be focused collectively on the consequences, understanding that we don't get to tell the attacker what their goal is. We don't even know, but that shouldn't even be relevant. The consequences should be relevant.
I mean, if an attacker, let's assume for a moment it's an adversarial situation or an attacker and a deliberate attack, and an attacker is coming after a system, it's highly, and we use safety systems as an example since that's the focus of our topic here today. I think it's highly unlikely that the motivation of the attacker is to make the safety engineer's life complicated. It's not that simple.
Yeah, highly unlikely.
Yep.
Yeah, their goals are related to those consequences that you mentioned, Isiah, and those consequences can be pretty serious in terms of, planned incidents and impact on, human life and health and safety and so forth. And it doesn't matter to me if it's a refinery or a petrochemical complex or even something like a hospital, right?
Yep, or trains. When we start putting positive train safety systems in, they're not thinking about the security threat.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things we had talked about in our previous conversation was that these consequences are going to have a real life impact on the end users because the environment is changing in terms of, how much cyber risk will be tolerated, right? And there aren't a lot of regulations right now from a government perspective, but one of the things we talked about last time was how companies like Moody's are actually evaluating companies' cybersecurity posture because that has a direct impact on your credit rating. If you can't recover from a cyber incident and you have an incident that actually causes physical damage, then, that makes you a bad investment, right? So the consequences are going to change not just from the perspective of a potential incident, but also from the perspective of the company, right? Is the company going to be able to continue to function? Are they a good credit risk and things like that?
What it comes down to is risk assessment, and companies have to balance risk across many, many things. And the fact that companies like Moody's are recognizing this and getting into it, putting some pressure on some of the companies, that's going to help raise awareness in companies to take some of these things a little bit more seriously, bring in the right expertise to work together. So that's a positive thing going forward.
Were you going to say something, Eric?
Well, yeah, no, I was just going to say much the same as what Hal said. It is a positive thing because it's a reflection of the fact that our view of the challenge is matured, and rather than while there's still a place for people to come in and do assessments on particular systems and, are they robust and are they secure? I welcome the sort of the raising of the question to a different level, which is, does your company have a mature and robust perspective on the threats and potential consequences? And that's the Moody's and the insurance companies and the underwriters and so forth. They can do that. They're not. It's not a technology focus. It's a business focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see them as a cyber professional all these years, especially coming from my roots. I see this as finally like the Calvary's here because they're looking at it from that, like, are you a good business perspective? And then that translates into, like, are you a threat to the public perspective? Because we're going to drop your credit rating because you're not thinking about, we're not just looking after your stock prices. We're looking at you're a risk to the freaking public because of your business practices. That's why I got excited that Moody's is involved.
We used to have, I worked for many years in the chemical industry, and we used to have a term that we used to use, and it's called license to operate. And it's not literally a license in the sense that you think of a license that's issued by a government or a regulatory authority. It's exactly what you just said, Isiah. It's basically public's trust in you and giving you an implicit permission to operate and exist and share the world with them. And it's a very, what's the right word? It's a very nebulous concept, but when you lose it, if you lose it, you're in a really bad place. It's
a very, very real thing, however. I mean, if you go back to 1984 in Bhopal, when Union Carbide had a release of methyl isocyanate, a toxin, over 3,000 fatalities, hundreds of thousands of longer-term injuries. They basically, over a relatively short time, went from one of the largest chemical companies in the world to basically no longer existing because of that license to operate thought process.
Well, I can tell you, I would add to that. I mean, I worked for most of my life in a chemical company, and when I started my career, our aspiration, they used to pump us up and get us excited about growth and everything, and they'd say, we want to be Union Carbide. Well, we ended up buying Union Carbide.
Yeah, well, what was left of Union Carbide?
What was left of it, yeah.
I was going to say society has spoken in that
Right.
incident.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to happen with some of these other issues. Because to your points, we need to start thinking beyond just individual sectors and beyond individual asset owners, and start thinking about this from a public perspective, because we're converging all these capabilities and services, especially at the municipality level. It's like, okay, this chemical plant's here, these trains are here, these pipelines are here, this electric distribution here, my hospital's here. So if you're at a municipality level, you should really be paying attention to what Moody's does, because all those businesses are operating in your community where your people live.
When you speak about your municipalities, your water systems, I mean, how safe is your water if it gets compromised through a cyber attack?
That's right. Yeah, it goes way beyond just these process plants. And smart cities is one of the areas that we follow too, and we've been preaching this message a lot. Is that you really need to pay attention to this issue now? It affects you too.
Well, and the challenge that we face with awareness is, and we've always had this, is to find the right balance. It's the balance between the need to raise awareness without scaring people to death. And we're living through that right now, right? With the COVID-19 thing. And so you want awareness to be raised. You want people to be prudent. You want them to take sensible precautions. You want them to understand potential consequences. But at the same time, you don't want them to panic. So, I wouldn't necessarily, I can't remember which one it was in the series, recommend that Die Hard movie that dealt with cyber attacks as a way to raise awareness, because it was a little hyperbolic.
All those movies.
Yeah.
And you don't need to go out and panic buy toilet paper or anything like that either.
No.
What I always used to tell people, especially when I was at FERC and I would see people protesting stuff like pipelines, I would say, hey, if it's a problem, there's a way you can solve that problem. You don't have to panic. You don't have to tie yourself to a tree or go, live under, what all the preppers are doing, or, preparing for an invasion. You can actually do practical things, which a lot of us are recommending, right? There's standards, there's building multidisciplinary teams, there's working with the credit agencies. If we all work together collectively, I agree with Eric that what we're trying to do in these podcasts, and a lot of us in the industry, is raise the awareness, but we're doing it with recommendations on, hey, we all know these different roles need to work together. We also know the credit agencies need to be educated on what to look for and who to work with. And I think, to Eric's point, that's kind of the angle, and why I'm happy and honored to be on the podcast, of having experts to talk about this. And then how do we bring that to the public?
That's a good point. So let's get into that a little bit. What are some of these recommendations? I'd like to start with bringing together this expertise from, what's traditionally two separate groups in operating plants or facilities or whatever you want to call them, and that's, safety and cybersecurity. So it's pretty clear that we have to bring these two domains together. What are some effective ways to do that? How do we do it?
Well, the first thing you want to take a look at is a lot of companies have what's known as an IT, information technologist, or information technology. And they're worried about enterprise systems, payrolls, just the normal day-to-day kind of stuff. And their focus is really on protection of data. When you get down into the control side of the house, where things are being built, manufactured, you'll call that operational technology, or OT.
OT. Yeah.
And in the past, OT is sort of delegated to the IT side of the house. That can no longer be the case. You really need those two groups to work together with a little bit of overlap, where OT has the lion's share of responsibility for the control network, let IT do their thing up at the enterprise system, and where they meet in a demilitarized zone, that's where the handshake occurs, that's where the overlap should occur. But there needs to be a lot of education of a lot of the OT folks, like the control engineers, the safety engineers, even the maintenance and the operations engineers. By and large, every company has a work process to execute projects, to execute manufacturing or operation, to execute maintenance. You need to start integrating the cybersecurity aspects of all of those work processes. So a lot of people think that, hey, here's this new big incoming, just another thing we have to worry about. But if you integrate it, then you're leveraging existing systems that already work, and it starts to take some of the intimidation factor away.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I'll take it up to an even a higher level, Hal. So with a lot of my customers, years ago, I originally started off doing exactly what you said, but then I started realizing there's another layer above that we also need to take consideration, especially when you start talking about all this different types of infrastructures being brought together at different levels. And that's the fact that what I've been doing more recently is proposing to a lot of these companies, the folks that are doing those jobs today, that's assigning additional duties that they already are understaffed and underpaid. So what I've always proposed to these organizations is, if you really want to truly integrate this, you have to basically hire additional staff so that those guys don't get overwhelmed with the work that they already have, and then create a new matrix team that focuses on control system security. Basically, you pull resources or you hire new resources that are coming from all different disciplines, and you truly build a multidisciplinary team. And then where that organization belongs is a whole different political argument. But what I've seen is that, we started off years ago trying to tell people, hey, integrate, do this, do this. Then we started realizing, okay, some of these sites, they're never going to have the staff and people to do it, and the corporate guys are never going to support them.
Yeah,
so
resources are pretty
leadership?
Yeah.
Exactly. So how do we, and this goes back to the cultural change where I hope that Moody's getting involved will make these people think. You have to actually invest in that staff and build a multidisciplinary team. So when I was on mission assurance and DoD, this is what they did. They took all of us from our previous backgrounds and they brought us together on a new team. They took old infrastructure protection people, safety guys, engineers, cyber guys, and we got a lot of fights on that team in the beginning. But what I learned from that team is we were the only team that was dedicated to doing the mission assurance across all mission objectives. We went outside the fence line. We were with utilities. We didn't just look at, this military plane or this drone. We looked at everything that could ever possibly impact it. And putting a team together like that had to be a full-time, fully invested, separate chain of command so that there's someone responsible for it. Because if you assign it to existing roles like, hey, IT, do your part, safety guy, do your part, maintenance guy, do your part, hey, somebody babysit the integrator. What I've seen, especially when getting field sites, they're never going to be able to do it without the money and the people. And if you don't give them another body that does that as their primary role, it's never going to be what we want it to be.
Now, think about it this way. Isiah just covered a lot of ground, and I was listening very carefully to the words he used. I think philosophically, most people would at least nod their head on the desire to have multiple perspectives or a multidisciplinary team. When we look at risk and we think of risk as threat, vulnerability, and consequence, very often we focus on the threat and vulnerability aspects of it. And guess what? In the cybersecurity space, threats are common. The types of attackers, we don't know what they are anyway. So as Isiah's pointed out, we don't know what their motivation is. So we just know that they're here to make our life complicated. So they're common, but it's IT related. The access point is often IT related. So it drifts to, we need an IT expert to understand those threats. The vulnerabilities are common because we're all using the same common technology. So there's a natural inclination in there to say, why do we need a multiple disciplinary team to monitor all the latest vulnerability reports and interpret them? You could argue that, you don't need to be quite as multidisciplinary for that. However, when you get to the consequence element, that's where it comes together. You need to understand all of the potential consequences. And this is exactly the nub, if you will, of this discussion about, does IT understand OT and does OT, all that misses the point. The point is we can't predict consequences. So we got to cover everything, all potential consequences. And that requires a multidisciplinary.
And that's a good point. So my team, we didn't focus on the network piece, but we brought telecom and IT networking, because those are actually two different professions. And trust me, in those fights, those guys used to go head to head with what quote networking is, because all the traditional telecom guys are in all different parts of the RF spectrum. So when I say multidisciplinary, I mean we truly had to have, hey, the IT network guys don't always understand how radio frequency and pump jacks and everything, but the telecom guys understand power line communications, long haul, land mobile radio, all the stuff that we were into. So that's why we built multidisciplinary. It wasn't from a monitoring perspective, but it was truly from how can we attack X by any and all means necessary. And then, oh, by the way, if it happens, what are all the different skill sets that need to be involved for us to figure out what are the attack surfaces? So that's why, I was saying that it has to be multidisciplinary, because it's not just monitoring and networking. It's system design, it's public safety. I mean, you got to have the safety managers, the physical security, HR. I don't know how many countries in different states I went into where their HR practices prevent you from doing certain things. And had we not talked to HR, we wouldn't know that, hey, we can't do these recommendations for a position change or access change without, like in Germany, they got the Workers' Council. Just someone moving between positions and us talking about role-based access control might involve HR. So that's what I mean by disciplinary from a higher level than just the technology or the network.
I've dealt with the German Works Council, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, I was just like, we had a conversation. I was like, hey, what happens if this person changed roles? Like, how do we make a procedure in your existing, to Hal's point, I was looking at their existing procedures that they have to do. It's like, if this person does X between these roles, how do I prevent them from getting into this part of the plant if they no longer need it? And they were like, oh, we have to change their position. In order to do that, we have to go through Workers' Council. I'm like, crap, now you have all these other layers that we're ignoring because we keep focusing on networking technology. So for me, when I say multidisciplinary, because I know where you're going, Eric, I always tell people I'm not just talking about networks or, systems guys versus, controls and programmers versus mechanical. No, we need somebody that understands all the above on that separate team and that make that their full-time job. Because if you try to tap the existing people, they're never going to give their full focus to it.
Yeah, they're already stretched pretty thin.
One thing that didn't really jump out in terms of attack surfaces is that you also have the insider risk and how you control access to your devices and networks and those kind of things. Those are operating procedures. Those are maintenance procedures.
HR, physical security, everybody has to be involved in that.
So you absolutely need that diverse team. You can also, a number of people have heard the term disgruntled employees. And you jog my thought process, Isiah, when you brought up HR, because there's some companies that they've got a disgruntled employee, they let that person go, and they don't bother to get around to disabling their access rights for who knows how long, couple weeks, couple months.
Yep. And I had a customer that had an insider attack because of that.
Yep.
And it was the maintenance guy that programs everything, had all the logic and software and everything else.
Right. So, I think some of those examples you brought up, I brought up, it clearly illustrates the need for that multidisciplinary matrix. When you get into a smaller company or a medium-sized site, I don't see that you're going to have the resources to do a dedicated team per se, but I certainly understand the need for a lead cyber person on site that is responsible for the matrix. And then there are those other people who are going to have to share roles, their role plus understand enough about cybersecurity to interface. But depending upon the size of the concern, how you organize that matrix, it's a different issue depending upon the size of your concern.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that's why tying this back to the whole Moody's getting involved in public awareness, and to Eric's point of not scaring people, is those are the kind of recommendations that I try to give the C-level. because I want them to understand that this isn't a delegated to that plant in Germany and this one in Ohio. No, this is you, Mr. C-level. You need to make a corporate decision on how you're going to staff this team, because they have to support, to Hal's point, they have to support everybody, especially the people that are out there by themselves at some remote station. They're never going to be. So it has to be a leadership, from my perspective at least. It has to be leadership. And I think Moody's and other outside people looking at these companies' culture, that's going to force the leadership to do what you're talking about, Hal, because you're right. I mean, some of those sites I go to, when I make those recommendations, I take them all the way back up to the C-level. And I'm like, look, this is the problem. They can't fix this. You have to fix it.
Your point's well taken, Isiah, that it does have to be a corporate-led, top-down approach. That was recognized in process safety a long time ago. You've got the Center for Chemical Process Safety that actually talks about that changing a company's culture. It's got to start from the top. If you're not going to be supported by your leadership, then it makes the folks' lives down in the trenches very, very difficult.
Absolutely. Let's talk about standards for a minute, because there is a lot of guidance that already comes from the standards about how to handle some of these issues in terms of convergence of cybersecurity and process safety. Can anybody give us some, additional information or facts about, what the standards are doing to address this issue and how the end users might access some of those resources in the standards bodies?
Well, if you really want to get overwhelmed, you start doing some searches and you start figuring out just everybody and their brother seems to be addressing cybersecurity in their standards. So a lot of it depends upon what industry you're in. Certainly with regard to the process industry, you've got the ISA 62443 series of standards and technical reports that is still evolving, but provides some very, very good guidance. Something a little bit more generic would be NIST. Eric, can you tell me what national?
You're talking about the NIST framework. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, NIST has.
He's talking about Special 800 series.
They've got a plethora of standards that cover the gamut.
NIST has what they call most
guidelines.
of the documents from NIST are what they call special publications, and the two that are most relevant in this space, in the cybersecurity space, are special publication 853 and 884. And then in addition to their guidance material in the form of special publications, NIST really sort of came on the scene in a big way a few years ago with the publication of the Cybersecurity Framework, which, as the name implies, is not a standard. It's a reference framework for connecting or basically connecting standards to subjects to which they apply.
That was a good way of putting that, Eric, because people keep forgetting that NIST does not write standard. They write guidelines.
Right.
And they map to international standards. So even in the 82 is what you're talking about. And the 53, when you read that big blob that no one reads, it talks about mapping to ISO and IAC. And they do the same, when Susan wrote 82, they were talking about 62443. So that's good to distinguish between that, because people get confused between frameworks, guidelines, and standards, which should all play nice together. But to your point, Eric, some people like to use those interchangeably, and they're not all the same things.
Standards come in many forms. I mean, if you use the term standard with a small s and sort of air quotes around it, you have to qualify it. There are formal consensus-based open source development standards like ISA and IEC. Even ISA and IEC are different because ISA is developed by individuals and IEC standards are developed by countries. Then there are sector-specific standards, and then there are guidelines, and then there are frameworks, and we just tend to lump them all together and call them standards. And it's when you try to point out to people that there are differences, you can only go so far without sounding very pedantic. So it's like, no, I don't want to induct you into the black art of standards writing. I just want you to be aware that they're not all created the same.
Yeah, agreed. I spend half of my time trying to educate my customers that yes, you can pull controls from multiple standards to accomplish whatever the issue is. And their eyes light up like, well, you can do that? Yes, there's no rule that says you can't unless your country has a law or regulation that is binding. That's different.
And
Now,
there just aren't a lot of those right now when it comes to cybersecurity, not from what I can see, unless you count some of these consumer-oriented like IoT cybersecurity laws that have passed in places like California. There just isn't. Or you're in the electric sector, right? And you have to conform to NERC SIP.
Well, the thing about NERC SIP coming from FERC is it doesn't apply to the whole electric sector. It only applies to bulk transmission. So I always tell people that stuff doesn't apply to co-ops or, oh, by the way, the distribution grids in all 50 states. And then overseas, obviously. But yeah, to your point, the regulatory standards or laws that have teeth, that's different than the standards that me and Eric and Hal were just talking about.
But to Larry, to your question, I think your question was, where would you point people if they wanted to get practical guidance on?
Yeah, where do you go?
We're talking about cybersecurity and process safety and the intersection of the two. I've been quoted many times. I think it's shown up in articles and everything as saying standards are not meant to be read by civilians. I wouldn't point people to a standard right away. I would point to more like guidance information that will gradually draw. Standards are reference documents. They're like, it would be like telling somebody if you want to get an education of something, go read the encyclopedia. That's not the best way to do it. So specifically to your question in the area of cybersecurity and safety, there are a couple of technical reports currently published, one by the IEC and one by ISA, and Hal is very familiar with the ISA one because he is one of the principal authors, and it's ISA TR, that stands for Technical Report 84.00.09. And Hal, correct me if I mischaracterize this, but it basically presents cybersecurity to and from, the perspective of a safety engineer, which is what we need to do. We need to project ourselves into those other disciplines and, in a sense, answer two fundamental questions. Who are you, cybersecurity, and why do I care? Now, there's a similar document from the IEC called 63069, which is also a very similar, I think it is generated with a similar intent in mind. Those would be good things to read. First of all, they're a little less voluminous than, and maybe more purpose specific than standards. And so, oh goodness,
it's certainly easier to read than an actual
and
standards document.
Then we did talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework. The cybersecurity framework, I cannot speak highly enough of it. It doesn't go into a lot of the details specific to cybersecurity and safety, but if you want to get a good introduction to the cybersecurity challenge and how to structure your approach, you have a hard time finding a better place to start.
I agree with
resources. Yeah, all good resources.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, those are good places to start, and then understanding that, hey, you're not limited to that. I think that's the next part of the topic. To your point, Larry, is if you're just talking about general laymen, they need to understand that you can start with the things that Eric said, but understand that you're not limited, meaning that just because the framework is shaped the way it does, doesn't mean you can only use it that way. Because that's always when people get confused. I'm always spending all my time educating them. The framework maps to all these different things. It means you can use whatever you need to. And if you read the framework correctly, it tells you to do that. By the way, most people don't read that part. But no, I agree 100%. Those are good places to start. And then folks need to continue to dig deeper and customize for their organization.
So, of course, if we wanted to find out more about that, we'd go to like NIST.gov or ISA.org.
Yeah. If you do a Google search on NIST cybersecurity framework, web search, you'll find it immediately. And, we at ARC, I'm sure we can put up when we post this link to this podcast, well, hopefully we can put some references alongside the link that says.
Yes, we will. Yeah, we most certainly will.
One of the nice things about the NIST documents is they can all be downloaded for free.
Yep.
It's your tax dollars at work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're developed by the U.S. government, so therefore there is no copyright by definition.
Yep, and I've seen other countries using it too because it's free. You know, UAE and all these, in Singapore and everyone else passing all these laws in their countries. When you actually read them, they're referencing in this cybersecurity framework in the 53 and the 82. You know, so it's actually pretty cool to see that. For the ISA 84 stuff, obviously you have to pay for it, but I guess you could post a link for the ISA website that talks about the history of the 84.
Yeah,
that's what I always give people these.
I think that, you know, in a subject like cybersecurity, that is by definition a cross-cutting subject. If you're going into it as a cybersecurity expert and wanting to understand all the details of the nuances of cybersecurity and applied in a lot of different domains, that's one approach. But the average asset owner or end user is not in that position. They're in a position of saying, help me understand cybersecurity in my context. And so they're better advised to find a trusted advisor. And this trusted advisor could take many forms. It could take the form of an internal expert, could take the form of a paid consultant. It could take the form of a trusted source document like the NIST cybersecurity framework, and start there and let that document lead you to the references that you need.
It's good advice.
Yeah, very good
agree,
advice.
100% agree.
Well, gentlemen, we're getting near the end of our podcast time here.
Already?
Yeah, it's already been 45 minutes. There's a lot to talk about here, you know. And as we talked about earlier when we were organizing this might be a two-parter because we didn't get into anything regarding safety and cybersecurity assessments and things like that. So there's a lot of other ground to cover here. But I think we pointed out some good resources and maybe some good ways for the end users to get started and really, you know, why we're in this situation and why it's so important right now. So I look forward, you know, hopefully to getting together again to talk about this topic some more. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today, Eric and Hal and Isiah. You know, all experts in their field and a great discussion. And thanks again for joining us here today. And hopefully we'll do this again very soon.
Well, thanks, Larry, for putting this together. And I apologize to you and to the listeners if my scratchy throat was distracting, but hopefully not.
And it's not coronavirus, so we don't have to worry.
No, it's not. And even if it is, I'm self-quarantined in my office right here in Austin, Texas. So, but it's not.
All right.
It's not. It's a pure, simple cold.
Hope you feel better soon. And again, this is Larry O'Brien of ARC Advisory Group, and thanks for joining us today on the ARC Cybersecurity Podcast.